Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Horse Racing Show. I'm Kenny Rice. Thank you for your time again this week. Big show today. We're going to talk with Jeff Bloom, the owner of maybe the best horse in the world, Midnight Bisou. She certainly looked that way, winning the Fleur-de-Lis last weekend at Churchill Downs. And so Jeff will talk about her and what her future plans are. Maybe she'll go against the boys again, as she did in the Saudi Cup when she lost just barely to Maximum Security. And then we'll check in with Churchill Downs to talk more about the big news that came out late last week, that there will be fans at the Kentucky Derby. How many, they're not sure of yet. They're still working on that. But the main thing is, and the huge thing is, there will be people in the crowd. And after that, who knows? But the main thing is, if it's 20,000, if it's 40,000, it will not be 160,000, but it will be a great crowd. And that's what's more important, because I've covered horse races now the last 2 weeks without anybody there. And so I'm looking forward to that. Ben Chafin's on lead guitar as always. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Kenny.
Mr. Thomas Kenny, our ace researcher. Hello, Thomas.
How you doing, Kenny?
Good. You know, we were talking about, and especially about Midnight Bisou here. She's going head-to-head with the boys again this year before it's out, maybe even in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Jeff will tell us more about that in a few minutes. But thinking of sports where men and women compete against each other head-to-head, and I'm not talking exhibition like they'll have sometimes with tennis or golf or a three-point shooting contest in basketball, nothing like that, on a regular basis. Of course, horse racing comes to mind immediately. You have female jockeys against male jockeys, of course, female horses against male horses. Equestrian competition as well. The 3-day events, for example, you have a male and female rider and horse going against each other all the time. So it's not unusual in the equestrian world, in the horse racing world. The other sport that came to mind immediately, and this is Thomas's sport, is car racing, where, you know, we've had from Janet Guthrie all through the years to Danica Patrick. It's been rare, but not unusual, for a female to drive against a male in competition. And I guess there's a few other sports out there. I just, off the top of my head, can't think of them, where on a regular basis you have female and males competing against each other.
Yeah, the only other one that I can think of, and I'm speaking from personal experience here, is archery, which I know, at least in the Olympic trials, they separate the events by gender. But when I shot it in high school, it was actually co-ed.
Mm-hmm. And I would imagine there's probably a few other, like, high school exceptions, maybe even some college exceptions, where men and women compete against each other. If you know of any out there and you're listening, be sure to drop us a line, go to our Facebook page at Horse Racing Show and let us know, or send us the question at Horse Racing Show on Twitter. But talking now about female horses, it is rare, very rare, to have a horse good enough, a filly or mare good enough to be named Horse of the Year. And since the Eclipse Awards began way back, and it's, you know, it's kind of way back now. It's not centuries old, but decades old, Thomas. It's not been an easy thing for a filly or mare to do, to be Horse of the Year.
That's right. There's only been a handful, starting in 1983, All Along, trained by Patrick Biancone, who's been on the show, actually.
Right.
We've got 1986, Lady's Secret, 2002, Azeri, and then 3 in a row, 2009 to 2011, Rachel Alexandra, Zenyatta, and I'm going to butcher this one, Havre de Grace.
Pretty close, yeah. named after a place, Havre de Grace, there in Maryland is the name of the town. And yeah, I mean, they had that run there, especially with Rachel Alexandra and Zenyatta getting so much attention. They were, you know, some could argue certainly the horses of that decade. If the decade ends in 2010, of course, then you had the 2 Triple Crown winners of American Pharoah and Justify. But it has been rare, and it's taken a special effort. And it started, as you said, with All Along, and there's only been 6 Maybe this year there'll be a seventh one. Midnight Bisou right now is firmly atop the National Thoroughbred Racing Association poll. Yeah, we got a half a year to go and probably another race, maybe two, before the Breeders' Cup comes around. But she is in control of her destiny, as we'll say at the moment. Where is she going next? How is she doing after that big win in the Fleur-de-Lis? We'll talk with owner Jeff Bloom when we come back on the Horse Racing Show right after this. Welcome back into the Horse Racing Show. One of the best things about this is catching up with people that I've really enjoyed knowing over the years and seeing the success they had. This man is a former jockey, an excellent TV analyst, and one of the good guys and sharp guys in the business. He is Jeffrey Bloom, the owner of Bloom Racing Stable, and quite possibly, and I'll bet he'll say so, he has the best horse in the world, Midnight Bisou, who just came off a terrific performance in the Fleur-de-Lis just a few days ago at Churchill Downs. Jeff joins us now from beautiful Oceanside, California. Jeff, how are you?
Well, I'm doing well, especially after that wonderful introduction. That was too kind, Kenny. Way too kind.
Well, I from good, I don't even know. See, I'm at the point in life where, Jeff, I can't remember when we met. I just know it's always been fun and interesting every time, including the recent interview I did with you before her big race in Louisville last weekend.
Well, look, I've always been a big fan of yours, and you're a great asset to our industry and to the entire media world. And so any chance or opportunity I get to spend some time with you, I obviously look forward to it.
And you have what the horse racing world needs, a star. And, of course, she was the champion older horse last year, a champion older female last year, coming back this year. Tough race in the inaugural Saudi Cup, barely losing to Maximum Security. And then 4 months later, she just roars. It looked almost as much like a workout when she started making her move in the turn as it did a race the other day in the Fleur-de-Lis, I thought, Jeff.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, you never know what's going to happen. Two things. One, a horse coming back from traveling abroad like that, and she certainly had to lay her body down in that race. And then that much time off. We were really confident coming into the race. We had continued to recognize she was training as well, if not better, than she ever had in her entire career. So we went into the race extremely confident, but with the usual anxiety you have with some of the unknowns. And to see her perform like that, Kenny, was just awe-inspiring. I mean, I'm close to her, and I've been close to her since we brought her into our portfolio. But even for me, knowing what I know about her, to see her perform like that and make that move the way she did just took the air out of me. I was just as a racing fan, was just blown away by her brilliance. And I got to tell you, there isn't a day go by where I don't appreciate or recognize how fortunate I am to be part of this. Going back and looking at her, not just her race record, but once upon a time, you could have bought her for $19,000 at the 2016 Keeneland yearling sale. I think that shows the uncertainty. And when you hear $1 million purchases, but they don't go on to win the Triple Crown and all this that they had hopes for, it shows the uncertainty and the breaks sometimes in this business. Because I believe it's $80,000 you guys spent for it, Ocala, just a few months later. Yeah, it's a crazy game, and as you mentioned, there's countless thousands of horses that are in A where they don't meet the reserves that their owners assign a value for and go on to do incredible things. And the reality is, when I purchased her as a 2-year-old, she was one of my have-to-haves, and I really wasn't sure that she was going to fit into our budget. The market was really hot, and so much of it too ties into timing where a horse is in the catalog, if other interested buyers have already spent their budget. There's so many things that have to go the right way. I don't know what my final number would have been, and I get asked that a lot, but as I mentioned, she was one of 2 horses that I was just going to have, and I was hoping that we'd be able to afford her. It all worked out.
What did you see in her, Jeff, that some other people had obviously overlooked a few months earlier when she was a yearling, that you saw as a 2-year-old that you said, Midnight Bisou is the one. I've got to go after this?
Well, I can't give those secrets away, Kenny, because then somebody else will get the next one. But it's actually a combination of factors. And for me, especially, you look at horses differently in terms of their buying stages. So at the 2-year-old sales, you get the opportunity to actually see the horses move. You get to see their stride, their efficiency of motion. And part of it is scientific or identifiable black and white things like a horse's conformation, the time that the horse went, their pedigree. And a big part of it is the intangibles, a horse's presence, your gut feel, things that the horse presents to you in terms of how they react or don't react to the conditions of a sale. And so for me, it wasn't as though her breeze itself was a dazzling, sizzling kind of breeze. She went fast enough. And for me, these horses they're never going to have to go 9-4, 10 flat again in any time in their career. So as long as a horse is fast enough, it's how are they moving? How do they finish up the work? What's their gallop out like? And for me, and seeing her, as I do all the horses when we're buying them, before, during, and after their performance, she just had this incredible presence about her. And the way she leveled out in the latter part of her preview, the latter part of the breeze, when she got comfortable, her efficiency of motion, the way she carried herself, and her stride coverage to me was just so blatantly impressive. And then, and more importantly, the way she carried herself in her presence. And that's the part that you really have a hard time teaching or describing to somebody. It's that gut instinctual thing, having been around horses for a long time, and you hope you're right, that you see it in their eyes.
Talking with Jeff Bloom, he owns Midnight Bisou. Best horse in the world?
Well, you're talking to somebody who's going to give her the vote for best horse in the world. But what instills a little more confidence in me in saying that, listen, Steve Asmussen, who's accomplished just about everything there is to accomplish and more, and obviously it goes without saying, one of the most incredible, most talented, most accomplished trainers in the history of our sport, when he says things about a horse that are in line with, arguably the best horse in the world, well, I'm not going to argue with him on a comment like that. And I think what's even more exciting, Kenny, is the fact that she's getting better. Mike Smith, who's been on her for most all of her races, when he was talking to me afterwards later that night and the following day and explaining to me that he was sitting on the back of a horse, he said, that hadn't ever felt that good. He said, as good as she is, she was that much better, and you have no idea how much more was left in the tank and what she felt like. So kind of gives you goosebumps.
Yeah, when I saw her gallop out, I mean, just looked as strong and good as you can ever expect a horse to look after a race. I was just so impressed. I've been impressed with her, since I first saw her, as everybody else has. But I thought everything just went perfectly. And, of course, that's a win and you're in, so you got a Breeders' Cup. And I think I mentioned to you, before after the race one, I said off camera, of course, were you in the Breeders' Cup? Were you in the Breeders' Cup distaff or the Classic?
Yeah, and so the way I describe it is definitely the Breeders' Cup, and so the good news is you've got that in your pocket, the win and you're in. But at this point in time, our goal is to get to the Breeders' Cup, and when I say that, there's a couple of race options there, as you know. So you've got the Breeders' Cup Classic or the distaff, and I think there would be no reason at this point to not consider both options. You see how the rest of the season plays out, but ultimately the goal is to take down the Breeders' Cup, and whichever race that is, we'll see how it plays out leading up to it.
And she's going to Saratoga now?
Yeah, in fact, she's on her way this afternoon. She'll head up there where Scott Blasey, Steve Asmussen's assistant trainer, who has spent the most time with Midnight Bisou, he'll be up there looking after their first set of horses coming in. And the obvious point for us next on the calendar would be the Grade 1 Personal Ensign.
Okay. So I didn't know if she would try again against the boys or not, how that was going to work out right now. Yeah,
I mean, at this point, we're most likely going to look at the places that work the best for her. And as I stated, the ultimate goal for us is to take down the Breeders' Cup. So what's the right way to get to that point?
And as far as, you mentioned coming out of Saudi, As we know, we've seen some really good horses come out of going to Dubai in the past, Middle East. They come back, and it does, just like any of us. You start making flights and you go back and forth as you do all the time, coming from California to New York and the East Coast and in Kentucky. It can wear you out. It didn't seem to bother her at all, from what Steve told me and what you've told me.
I like that you bring that up, because that's one of the more amazing things about this filly is the fact that she just has such an incredible way of handling things. There really isn't. It's not possible to phase her, and so when I come back for a cross country, I'm finally recovering from that trip myself, and so she's always adapted well to whether it's a shipping situation, a new environment, a different geography, a different track surface, and they have to come back after that flight. They go into quarantine and they're not in their normal routine. There's a lot of foreign sort of experiences for them that they're not used to, and she just handles things so well, and that was just one of the ongoing remarkable things about Midnight Bisou, is that there's really nothing you could throw at her that gets her riled up, and so to see her come back and perform that way was another notch in just this is a filly of she's just breathes different air. She's a different kind of animal.
We're talking with Jeff Bloom, owner of Bloom Racing Stable, owner of Midnight Bisou, right now the ranked top horse in the world. We'll have more with Jeff right after this quick break. You're listening to The Horse Racing Show. And welcome back into The Horse Racing Show. I'm Kenny Rice. Glad that you're joining us, and really thrilled to have Jeff Bloom with us. Just a great guy, great horseman, and he has, in all likelihood, the best horse in the world in Midnight Bisou. She is number one by a long margin in the latest NTRA poll. She's been there pretty much all year long. And, Jeff, let's go back to Saudi just a minute. I don't know what all you can talk about. I don't know all the legal stuff going on, so stop me whenever I need to be stopped. But you barely lose that race to maximum security. I think it's been well documented that Jason Service has been indicted after an FBI sting of accused of using illegal substances in his horses. One of those horses, of course, is Maximum Security, although it hasn't been proven in any of the tests that Maximum Security had drugs in his system, as we know at this stage. And all that's leading up to this. They're still withholding the purse over there, right? You haven't gotten a nickel of your runner-up finish, maybe even eventually your first place finish if he's disqualified.
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, you pretty much know as much as we do. As you're aware, there was an announcement made a while back by the Saudi Jockey Club indicating that they were going to be conducting their own internal private investigation in light of the federal indictments against numerous industry personnel, including Jason Service. And so what we were informed of before it was made public was that this investigation was getting started. They didn't know how long it was going to take. The COVID-19 issue was slowing things down. But they intended to be as quick as possible with this investigation, and they would be letting us know. And since that time, there has been virtually not much, if any, communication as to the progress being made. But I do know this just from a few limited interactions. The folks there in Saudi do want this resolved. They want it resolved as quickly as possible. What that means for us, I don't know what the end result is. Hopefully for us, it means we get bumped up into first place, which would be a phenomenal, rewarding situation. But at this point in time, the funds for that particular race have not been distributed in any way, shape, or form. And we're all sitting, waiting anxiously to hear the news as to how this will play out.
As a longtime horseman that you are, the former jockey, you worked in TV, you own horses, you own horses, you race them. And just as a guy that covers the business, I think for still a lot of the people on the outside, the people that are casual, the people that know a little bit about Midnight Bisou, and they've heard maybe even some of the negative stuff surrounding all the maximum security, they're thinking, how come they can't work this out faster? Did they win? Did they not win? Was there anything used? Was there anything not used? It seems to be cut and dried. I'm talking about the guy that's out there worried about when the baseball season or the NBA season is going to start back and just enjoys watching a horse race or two during the course of the year.
Yeah, and it's tricky. Look, those were those indictments that were made public, some pretty damaging evidence there. And the tough part about it is, as you know, horses perform, they go through a series of tests to make sure that those horses performing didn't in fact come back with a positive test for performance enhancing drugs and the like. So when they conduct a test, and if there are no positive results, but there's this other evidence that indicates that potentially there were performance enhancing drugs there, you get into a number of legal issues, which, I'm not smart enough to be the guy who knows what the answer is there, but I do know that as a whole, the folks in Saudi Arabia have a zero tolerance policy, and our industry is getting much better at trying to make sure that we eliminate the potential for anybody illegally cheating in those sorts of ways. And it's a process. It's frustrating, and obviously it's the last thing you want to have happen for a number of different reasons, including the folks who have a limited understanding of how our sport works. But this is a situation where hopefully the folks in Saudi have exhausted all their resources to conduct an investigation that will give us some black and white evidence either way as to what the right answer is. But this is a topic of conversation that's been going on not just in our sport but in other sports, and it's a process to make sure that we're educating people and making sure that we're monitoring things as best as possible so that it's a clean sport.
Talking with Jeff Bloom, the owner of Midnight Bisou, Bloom Racing Stable. Best horse in the world, many people feel. Jeff, because you have been involved like in the aftercare program and several other programs, and consulted with people, and they've consulted with you about everything going on with horse racing right now. Where do you think the sport has come from all the events last year and all the negative publicity, not just in the trade papers that we're used to, blood horse racing form, but in the LA Times and the Washington Post and the New York Times, about the horse deaths last year, where we are now, and especially from an ex-jockey standpoint, about the use, or in this case, limited use of the whip or the riding crop, as we'll say.
So I think, on all those fronts, most everything comes down to education and communication. And, for the folks who have, as I mentioned before, sort of a limited understanding or education of how our sport works, it really comes down to communication. I'll start first with the discussion on whip use. As a former rider, I get really frustrated when I hear rules being implemented, eliminating or taking away a tool that a jockey requires to not only assist with the performance of his horse, but to control, correct, and keep safe himself, the other horses, and the other riders in the race. And the whip use has changed substantially since the days of when I was riding. The whips today are what we call safety whips, and they're very kind in terms of it's more a popping sound, if you will, than it is an actual physical thing that the horse feels. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to really cause any or inflict any pain on a horse with those whips today. And whether you hit a horse one time or 10 times, it's how you hit that horse and where you hit that horse. So the notion of thinking that jockeys who are going 45 miles an hour around 12 other horses who weigh 1,200 pounds and other jockeys who are manipulating and navigating and driving and making decisions, it's ridiculous to think that a jockey should be having to think whether he hit a horse 2 times or 3 times within the last 10 seconds. There's things that horses do during the course of a race. They might lug in, they might lug out, they might try to bolt, they might not have enough desire to get through a hole that they're halfway, and all those reasons are why the use of a whip is there. And you can monitor and control over abuse without implementing a number, say 3 times from the 16th pole home. So we have a lot of work to do there, and I do take issue with the latest rules that some of the jurisdictions have implemented in terms of the whip use. As to the troubles that we experienced in the media with some of the breakdowns and stuff, and again, I think that was a communication thing. The sport is doing everything in its power to make things as safe as possible. And there have been some huge improvements where, Santa Anita now have they have tools where they can sort of evaluate horses before they actually go out and run and identify problem areas. And there's additional veterinarians that are monitoring things. But, just like in any sport, accidents are going to happen. As long as you can mitigate as many of those risks as possible, that's a great thing. But the fact of the matter is we have a great game in horse racing, and let's educate people what it's about, how it works, and not make these drastic or dramatic changes without making sure first that there's a reason for it and that it's going to actually improve or protect. And, we've made some great strides. I think we've made some mistakes, but like anything else, it's a process, and you keep trying to make sure you're doing it the right way.
Well said, Jeff Bloom. You want to be commissioner? I would vote for you if they had the commissioner election. But as we know, there'll never be a racing commissioner. I would like to see a racing commission picked from various parts, maybe some like you, some people that have been jockeys, current owners, whatever the situation, and have like a committee, almost like a Supreme Court of racing, if you will, and go to that body when there's conflicts in a state and see if it can be worked out. Is that crazy to even come up with that concept?
Well, I love where you're going with that, Kenny, and I fully support that. Number one, that guy's not me. I'm far from wanting to be the commissioner, but I think you're right. I think it's time, and what's been an issue for this sport for a long time is we have no one centralized uniform body that's governing, overseeing, and providing oversight into how things are handled at each of these individual racing jurisdictions, because we have such a fractional setup of racetracks with their own rules, and within those racetracks within the states, rules are implemented differently, whether it's related to drugs or how things are handled on the racetrack. And so I'm in total agreement with you. I think we're closer to that notion than we've ever been, but there's some hurdles to still overcome. And we have some very smart individuals that participate in this game, as racehorse owners, successful business people with lots of experience on boards. And so I think we have the right people to choose from. It's just a matter of figuring out how to take the way the industry has been run for so long with racetrack owner operators and their respective jurisdictions and working better together to create a uniform, centralized body that provides the proper oversight for everything as it relates to the way stewards that make rulings on things in races and on the racetrack make their decisions and all those things related to the sport and how it works.
Jeff, it's been a pleasure. I can't thank you enough for being on, and congratulations again on all the success with Midnight Bisou. We will see her again, the personal instant. Do you have any idea if you'll be able to go and watch her in person at Saratoga yet?
Boy, I tell you what, I sure hope so. If they're, it sounds like they're going to do everything they can to make it so that there can be at least owner participation. But if not, maybe I can get a job with you guys for that particular race on the sidelines and be your assistant or something.
You're too good. You could take over the show. It would work.
No way. I'll be happy to carry around your bags for you, Kenny.
Listen, it's great to catch up with you. We'll do it again, and continued success. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Jeff Bloom owns Midnight Bisou. Bloom Racing Stables having a great start, great success already. Started with Majestic City, multiple graded stakes winner, and now the best horse in the world. We'll be back with more of the horse racing show. Stay with us right after this. Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. Kenny Rice here. Delighted to have this longtime friend of mine back on the show again. And I was actually on his show last week. He ran out of guests. He said, would you be on? I said, sure. He is Darren Rodgers, Director of Communications at Churchill Downs, as good as there is in the business. Darren, welcome back in.
Kenny, always great to be with you. Thanks for joining our show last week.
You carried me. And then you carried me last weekend. And what a great weekend at Churchill Downs. We talked about how racing has been going on when other sports was on the sidelines, of course, with the COVID and everything going on. But to see probably, quite possibly, certainly in the NTRA poll, the best two horses going right now, Midnight Bisou and Tom's the Tom, to see them in back-to-back races, the Fleur-de-Lis and the Stephen Foster, was just a spectacular day of racing. It was like a mini Breeders' Cup.
I've been doing this for more than 25 years. I know you've been involved in horse racing well beyond that.
Before you were born, yeah.
Before I was born, and I'm just telling you that it's moments like Saturday when the top horses get together, not just at Churchill Downs, but also around the rest of the country. We saw some great racing action at Belmont Park, and we're just reminded of why we love doing what we do. And Tom's d'Etat is such a cool horse. He's 7 years old. He's at the top of his game. And I was blown away by the performance of Midnight Bisou. Her return to action. You had the Kentucky Oaks winner, Serengeti Empress, loose on the lead. She's at a high cruising speed. All things seem to be in her favor down the backstretch. And Midnight Bisou says, "Hold on just a second, I'm pretty good." And she was the absolute champ that she shows she was. And I don't think she was, at 100% for last Saturday's effort. But to see her win by, more than 8 lengths, geared down under a hand ride from Mike Smith, and stop the teletimer in 1:48 and change, that was spectacular. But then one race later for Tom's d'Etat to say, "Hold my beer." He delivered an absolutely brilliant performance. Outran. Time only matters when you're in jail. But to compare the two, it was a minute or not 1 minute, 1 second and 69 100ths faster than Midnight Bisou, and just missed the 1999 track record set by Victory Gallop. That was a sensational performance, and for Tom's d'Etat, under the great tutelage of Al Stahl Jr. at age 7, to be at the top of his game. Hats off to them and their patience and bringing them along. That was a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, and you guys have handled this all so well. Has there been any hiccups at all since racing resumed at Churchill Downs? And I think, as everybody knows, with the delay of the Derby till September, and obviously not getting to start exactly when you were hoping for, and now letting a small number of owners in, along with the trainers, of course, and the handlers. Any major hiccups along the way here, Darren?
No, there really wasn't. I think we're just adapting as we go along. I think, like all other businesses and our society in general, as we respond to real time information and adapt accordingly. I mean, I'm overly delighted that we were able to provide racing opportunities for our horsemen. Horse racing is such an important economic driver for especially those of us here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. It's just vitally important, and it's also important for these horses to get their activity and their action. They have to be cared for 7 days a week. So when we were able to get up and running in the middle of May, spectator-free, under strict protocols and guidelines, we tested backstretch workers, around 2,000 of them, for COVID-19. We had, daily protocols and procedures in place. We closed last Sunday. That was the conclusion of the spring meet. And so to be able to do that successfully without any issues along the way was extremely gratifying. Now, I do know that we were really hoping we could get some spectators in at a reduced capacity, but that was unable to be materialized. That now is the case, of course, on June 29th here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Spectators will be allowed at certain venues, but I'm really, really proud of our team, and I'm especially grateful to all the horsemen and backstretch workers, the jockeys and the valets, everyone that complied to put on this show, because it's vitally important, and we showed as an industry that we can operate during these difficult times.
We're talking with Darren Rodgers, Director of Communications at Churchill Downs. Of course, the big news, fans at the Derby. What does that mean? Well, we'll tell you all about it. What a tease there. Stay with us. We'll be right back on the Horse Racing Show. Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. Darren Rodgers, best in the business, communications director at Churchill Downs, with us. Big news last week. There will be fans allowed to come to this year's 146th running of the Kentucky Derby, the first Saturday in September. And Darren will personally come and pick you up and take everyone there. You know, what everybody asks, well, I got a ticket. Can I come to the Derby this year? I've already pre-ordered my tickets, as I'm sure a few thousand people have. But obviously, just from what I know of it, and you're the experts while you're on, of course, they're still figuring out how many people can do much of anything, not just in the state of Kentucky, but anywhere else. So what would be the answer if I had a ticket right now to Churchill Downs the first Saturday in May that's going to be in September?
Well, first of all, Kenny, we have to acknowledge the help that we received along the way, the hard work, the collaboration, the guidance that both the state and the local public health experts gave us along the way. Led by Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear. Our whole target is to provide a way and a path to safely and responsibly host Kentucky Derby Week in September with spectators. That was given, that approval was granted, some 10 weeks in advance of the Derby. We don't know what is going to happen along the way. In fact, the one thing that we do know is that things will continue to change. I think back, if we look at 10 weeks ago, what our nation and region looked like to where it is today. I don't know. Our company doesn't know. You don't know what it's going to look like 10 weeks from now. What we do know is we have a plan in place to host it with spectators. And, our team's deeply committed to holding the very best Derby. We're going to take all the necessary steps to protect the health and safety of everyone who attends, everyone who participates. We've established a comprehensive set of operating procedures that we've identified. There's a lot of precautionary measures, and they're gonna be followed while fans are in attendance in our facility. Now, what is that number? It's in the tens of thousands. We don't know what it'll look like. General admission we're going to have venue capacity reductions to limit the overall crowd density. And that includes the general admission, which will be restricted to the infield only. We've got the outdoor reserve seating. We've got tons of premium dining and suites. There's about 80 different ticketing areas throughout the Churchill Downs facility, which, by the way, 1.6 million square feet, 190 acres. It's a massive venue. It's much different than, say, a basketball arena or a football stadium. Mm-hmm. So we're going to adjust the capacity in all of these different areas and identify it. Where we're at today is we've, sold most of the tickets already in advance, and we are in constant communication with the customers that have purchased tickets. I know there's been some phone calls, there's letters that have been sent out. A new set of letters is going out as we speak that will ask those customers, hey, do you intend to attend? Do you intend to attend the Derby on Derby Week? If you don't, we can give you a rain check for 2021. We can offer a refund. We're being very flexible with our customers, and we're trying to get a good idea as to where everybody stands.
Perfect. I knew that you would have the answer. That's why I came to you. And during this time, there'll be all kinds of media people saying, I want to pass. I want to get in now. Now I want to come. There's going to be fans there. That's going to happen.
Oh, yeah. No, we're going to have to reduce access through everyone. I mean, even, employees, the guests, the credentials. We're not going to have any walkarounds. What we're going to do is have, in the past, for example, if you had maybe a ticket to a table, say in Millionaires Row, you would have the ability to go drop down and visit some guests down on the third floor box seats and roam around. We're going to reduce that. We have to change and adapt as we move along and restrict access for folks. This is going to be a different Derby. We're identify them. There's going to be no physical tickets. Every ticket's going to be electronic with the shuttles, the parking shuttles. We'll have more buses. People will be more spaced out, and those shuttles will be sanitized between each trip. So we're going to be fluid and change and address issues as they come along. But we're looking forward to this challenge. I mean, the Kentucky Derby is so much more than just this 2-minute horse race. It is, as you know, it's the most important race for horse racing internationally. When it comes to the breeding and sales industry as well. But it's such an important piece of the fabric of this community. It's woven into us. And so it's the ancillary benefits of us hosting the Kentucky Derby with spectators is vitally important for our local economy. And I think it's given a little pep in the step to those area businesses, the restaurants, etc., the hotels. But again, we're going to respond to real-time information, and we're going to react responsibly and safely.
Darren, as always, great information. Love to have you on the show. We'll have you back before the Derby. If you'll answer the call, we'd love to have you back again.
Always great to be with you, Kenny. We'll see you down the road, okay?
All right, my friend. Thank you. Darren Rodgers, Communications Director at Churchill Downs. More on the Horse Racing Show right after this. Welcome back into the Horse Racing Show. Again, thanks for your time this week. I think one of our more informative shows. It was really glad to have Jeff Bloom on to talk about Midnight Bisou, that outstanding mare who may be the best horse in the world right now, to try to get to some of what's going on with the Saudi Cup and trying to get that worked out. And just as a former jockey, too, his opinion on that riding crop or the whip and the overall industry. Great information. And Darren Rodgers laid it out. Be sure to tell your friends to go and listen to this again. If you're listening on radio, listen again on YouTube. If you want to know about the Kentucky Derby, Darren Rodgers, Communications Director at Churchill Downs, laid it out as good as you can get right now. So thank you to those two gentlemen for joining us today. Episode 74?
That's right, 74.
Wow. Yeah, and of course you can go to YouTube and look back at some of the memorable ones. Or if you're still quarantined yourself, maybe you want to listen to all of them. It'll help you pass the time. Thomas, I want to ask you and Ben both, have you not watched a sporting event because there's no fans there, such as a car race or a golf tournament or a horse race? Have you still said, gee, I want people to be there first?
I kind of, I really do want to see those people in the stands just because it gives it a different feeling.
Yeah.
It's there's that whole reason they say, home field advantage. That
right.
It's what the crowd, that energy that everyone gives off. At least that's how I see it.
Thomas, I bet you haven't quit watching a car race because there's no fans in the stands.
No, doesn't make that bit of a difference to me.
Because you're still, same with the horse race, right? You're still watching that because you got a great race out there.
Absolutely.
Well, I have covered now the last 2 weekends for NBC, the Belmont, where they had no fans and really no owners were allowed in. And then last week, covering the Fleur-de-Lis with Midnight Bisou and Tom Staton, who won the Stephen Foster on a great day of racing at Churchill Downs, where they did let some of the owners in. And it is different. But as Evan Hammonds wrote a really good What's Going On Here piece in the recent Blood Horse, check that out, just talking about not having a crowd. And as I said, having been there is something missing. But, of course, you can have the events. You can play sports without a crowd. The key is I hope they don't ever do it without broadcasters. That's the whole key, right, guys? Keep me employed.
Well, and it does make it a little bit harder to watch a broadcast without the broadcasters.
But it is great to see that they're going to have fans at the Kentucky Derby. That's exciting. We'll talk more about that as we keep getting closer to the first Saturday in September. And we'll talk again next week. I'm Kenny Rice, and this is the Horse Racing Show.